Welcome to our final lesson in Module 1, Research Fundamentals and Philosophy of Science. Today, we'll explore how to develop your own research philosophy, a crucial step in becoming a reflective and effective researcher. Throughout this module, we've examined different philosophical paradigms and their historical development. Now it's time to consider where you stand philosophically and how your position will shape your research practice. By the end of this lesson, you'll have tools to articulate your own philosophical assumptions and align them with your research approach. Thank you for your time, and I greatly appreciate you tuning in today. Please consider liking and subscribing to the channel so I can continue to produce content for everyone. Please consider visiting my website at subthesis.com to view different products, including whole courses. We have three main learning objectives for today's lesson. First, you'll learn to articulate your personal philosophical assumptions about knowledge and research, making explicit what might previously have been implicit beliefs. Second, you'll evaluate how philosophical positioning influences research practice, understanding the real-world implications of different stances. Finally, you'll develop a coherent statement of research philosophy that can guide your work and communicate your approach to others. These skills will help you become a more self-aware and intentional researcher. Being a reflective researcher means developing philosophical self-awareness about your assumptions and approaches. This awareness brings several benefits. It makes implicit assumptions explicit, helping you recognize biases and limitations in your thinking. It enhances methodological coherence by ensuring alignment between your philosophical beliefs and research practices. And it fosters ongoing reflection about your development as a researcher. Philosophical clarity also enables appropriate methodological flexibility. You can adapt methods to research questions when you understand the philosophical implications of different approaches. Finally, philosophical awareness helps you develop your distinctive voice as a researcher, grounding your work in a coherent worldview, rather than simply following disciplinary conventions without questioning them. A comprehensive research philosophy addresses these key components. Ontology concerns the nature of reality, what exists, and how. Epistemology addresses how we know what we know, the relationship between knower and known. Axiology involves the role of values in research, whether and how values should influence inquiry. Methodology refers to the appropriate approaches for generating knowledge given your ontological and epistemological assumptions. Finally, researcher role clarifies your position in the research process as detached observer, engaged interpreter, change agent, or something else. Together, these components form a coherent framework that guides your research decisions and practices. Let's begin examining your philosophical positioning by considering ontology, your beliefs about the nature of reality. A fundamental ontological question is whether you believe reality is singular or multiple. A realist position holds that a single, mind-independent reality exists that researchers can objectively study. A relativist position maintains that multiple realities exist, constructed through individual perceptions and social interactions. Most researchers fall somewhere on a continuum between pure realism and radical relativism. Ask yourself, do you believe the phenomena you study exist independently of human perception? To what extent are the concepts you research natural versus socially constructed? Your answers will help clarify your ontological position and its implications for your research approach. Epistemology addresses how knowledge is justified and the relationship between the researcher and what's being researched. The objectivism-constructionism continuum represents different epistemological positions. Objectivism holds that knowledge is discovered through careful observation of an external reality, with researchers maintaining distance to avoid bias. Constructionism views knowledge as created through interpretation and interaction, with researcher perspective inevitably shaping findings. Consider where you fall on this continuum. Do you believe researchers can obtain knowledge without influencing what they study? How do you view the role of interpretation in knowledge creation? Are rigorous methods sufficient to eliminate bias, or is researcher reflexivity essential? Your epistemological stance significantly influences how you approach data collection and interpretation. Your methodological preferences reflect deeper philosophical assumptions. Consider your comfort with different methodological approaches. Do you gravitate toward quantitative methods with their emphasis on measurement, statistical analysis, and generalizability? Or do you prefer qualitative approaches focused on meaning, context, and depth of understanding? Perhaps you see value in mixed methods that integrate both traditions. Similarly, consider your reasoning preferences. Are you more comfortable with deductive approaches that test established theories, inductive approaches that develop theory from observations, or abductive approaches that move iteratively between theory and data? Do you value participatory approaches that involve research subjects as collaborators? These methodological inclinations often reflect your ontological and epistemological positions. Axiology concerns the role of values in research, a dimension sometimes overlooked but critically important. Reflect on what values guide your research. Is your primary commitment to objectivity and neutrality, to giving voice to marginalized perspectives, to practical utility, to social justice and transformation? Consider where you stand on the continuum from value-neutral to value-centered research. Do you believe values should be eliminated from research to prevent bias? Or do you think values inevitably shape all research and should be explicitly acknowledged? Perhaps you believe research should be deliberately guided by particular ethical or political commitments. Your axiological position influences everything from topic selection to interpretation and application of findings. As you develop your research philosophy, you'll likely encounter tensions between different paradigmatic approaches. The quantitative-qualitative tension reflects deeper philosophical differences about the nature of knowledge and appropriate methods for generating it. The distance engagement tension concerns the appropriate relationship between researcher and research participants. The standardization flexibility tension addresses whether research should follow strict protocols or adapt to emerging insights and contexts. Rather than seeing these tensions as problems to be resolved, consider them productive spaces for reflection. Many researchers find ways to balance competing considerations, for example, by maintaining methodological rigor while acknowledging researcher positionality, or by using standardized methods while remaining open to unexpected directions. Thoughtful navigation of these tensions can strengthen rather than weaken your research approach. Researchers take various approaches to philosophical positioning. Some maintain paradigmatic purity, working entirely within one philosophical tradition. Others practice flexibility, primarily using one paradigm, but borrowing elements from others when appropriate. Some embrace pluralism, moving between paradigms for different research projects based on the questions being asked. Still others function as methodological bricklayers, creatively combining elements from multiple traditions. Consider which approach best fits your research context and personal inclinations. There's no single correct approach, but it's important to be thoughtful about how you navigate philosophical diversity. Whatever approach you choose, strive for coherence and transparency about your philosophical positioning and its implications for your research practice. Your research philosophy doesn't develop in isolation. It's influenced by disciplinary norms and expectations. Different fields have dominant paradigms and methodological traditions. Some disciplines are primarily positivist or post-positivist, others interpretive, and others critical or transformative. Journal publication expectations often reflect these paradigmatic preferences. Consider your discipline's dominant paradigms and how they shape research expectations. If your philosophical positioning differs from disciplinary norms, you'll need strategies for navigating those differences, perhaps by publishing in interdisciplinary journals, providing extra justification for your approach, or finding subcommunities within your field that share your philosophical orientation. Interdisciplinary influences can also enrich your philosophical perspective beyond your primary field's traditions. When articulating your research philosophy, address each major component we've discussed. For ontology, clarify your position on the nature of reality and whether it exists independently of human perception. For epistemology, explain how you believe knowledge is justified and the relationship between researcher and what's researched. For methodology, describe the approaches you consider appropriate given your ontological and epistemological assumptions. For axiology, address how values influence your research process. Throughout your statement, strive for coherence. Ensure your methodological choices align with your epistemological and ontological positions. Be reflective about limitations and challenges associated with your philosophical positioning. Use clear, accessible language that communicates your stance to others without unnecessary jargon. Your statement should evolve as your thinking develops through education and experience. Let's examine a brief example of a positivist research philosophy. A researcher with this orientation might state, I believe reality exists independently of human perception and can be studied objectively through systematic empirical methods. Knowledge is discovered through careful observation and measurement, with researchers maintaining distance to avoid influencing what's being studied. Research should employ standardized procedures that can be replicated by others, with an emphasis on quantitative measurement, statistical analysis, and hypothesis testing. While recognizing that complete value neutrality is impossible, I strive to minimize the influence of personal values on the research process and to distinguish clearly between empirical findings and value judgments. This position reflects ontological realism, epistemological objectivism, methodological quantitative emphasis, and axiological neutrality, a coherent philosophical framework that guides research practice. An interpretivist research philosophy takes a different approach. A researcher with this orientation might state, I believe reality is socially constructed through human interaction and interpretation. Multiple realities exist based on different perspectives and contexts. Knowledge emerges through understanding, lived experiences, and meanings people attribute to phenomena. Research involves interpreting these meanings through close engagement with participants in natural settings. Qualitative methods like in-depth interviews and participant observation are most appropriate for accessing these constructed realities. As a researcher, I acknowledge that my own background and perspective inevitably influence the research process, requiring ongoing reflexivity. my values shape all aspects of research, from topic selection to interpretation, making transparency about positionality essential. This position reflects ontological relativism, epistemological constructionism, methodological qualitative emphasis, and axiological transparency. A critical research philosophy emphasizes power and transformation. A researcher with this orientation might state, "I believe reality is shaped by social, political, economic, and cultural factors that privilege certain perspectives while marginalizing others." Knowledge production itself reflects and often reinforces these power dynamics. Research should examine how power operates and challenge oppressive structures. Appropriate methods include participatory approaches that involve marginalized communities as co-researchers and combine rigorous analysis with action for change. As a researcher, I explicitly align my work with goals of social justice and emancipation, recognizing that all research is value-laden and political. Reflexivity about my own social position and privileges is essential to ethical research practice. This position reflects an ontology focused on power relations, in epistemology emphasizing knowledge as political, methodological approaches centered on participation, and in axiology explicitly committed to transformation. A pragmatist research philosophy emphasizes utility and problem solving. A researcher with this orientation might state, "I believe reality has both objective and constructed elements. Some aspects exist independently, while others are socially created. Knowledge should be judged by its usefulness in addressing real-world problems rather than abstract correspondence to reality. Research questions should drive methodological choices, with mixed methods often providing the most comprehensive understanding. I value pluralistic approaches that draw on diverse perspectives and methods based on what works for specific contexts and questions. While acknowledging that research inevitably reflects values, I prioritize practical utility and stakeholder needs over ideological purity. The ultimate test of research quality is whether it enables effective action. This position reflects ontological flexibility, epistemological emphasis on utility, methodological pluralism, and axiology centered on practical outcomes. Your research philosophy isn't static, it evolves throughout your career. Academic training exposes you to different paradigms and methodologies, expanding your philosophical repertoire. Collaboration with diverse colleagues challenges your assumptions and introduces new perspectives. Reading widely across philosophical traditions enriches your understanding of different approaches. Reflective practice helps you recognize limitations in your current stance and discover new possibilities. Research experiences, especially when methods don't work as expected, prompt philosophical reconsideration. Embrace this evolution as part of your development as a researcher. Philosophical growth doesn't necessarily mean abandoning your core perspectives, but it often involves greater nuance, flexibility, and appreciation for alternative approaches as your research journey continues. Your research philosophy shapes every aspect of your research practice. It influences the questions you ask, what you consider worth investigating, and how you frame research problems. It guides your ethical approach, how you relate to participants, and what you consider responsible research conduct. It directs your analytical choices, what counts as evidence, and how you interpret data. It affects your application of findings, how you translate research into practice, and what impacts you prioritize. While philosophy sometimes seems abstract, its practical implications are profound. Developing philosophical clarity doesn't just satisfy intellectual curiosity, it makes you a more coherent, ethical, and effective researcher. The time invested in philosophical reflection yields practical benefits throughout the research process. As we conclude this lesson, consider these reflection questions to deepen your understanding. What is your emerging research philosophy, and how does it reflect your values and worldview? What tensions or contradictions do you experience in your philosophical positioning, and how might you address them? How does your philosophical stance influence your research design choices and relationships with participants? How do you plan to continue developing philosophically throughout your research career? Take time to reflect on these questions as you develop your position paper for this module. Thank you for taking the time to listen to today's video. Please consider liking and subscribing to my channel so I can continue to produce videos for everyone. Also, please consider visiting my webpage at subthesis.com, a place where you can find entire courses and other products. Thank you again for your time and support.